there. My name is Alexander Davis, and I will be talking to you about some historical time frames and periods within the community psychology mindset or discipline that I found relevant. This presentation will talk about the beginning of the mental health movement in America, which was under JFK's administration, and we started seeing massive reform within this area after the signing and the publishing of the findings of JFK's Committee on Mental Health. Um, what is especially interesting from a sociological standpoint is the mass amount of issues that were going on within the 60s. You had the race riots, the equality demonstrations, and then you also had this um, thing called gay rights that was coming into fruition as well during this. Um, Without further ado, let's begin, shall we? Um, Now, as I am not sure I noted, there was a formatting issue. This particular bar and time frame reaches over, and then we reach into the 1963 to 68 era, following out on the publishing of the 14 ounces of prevention, a case study, um, and that was at January 1st, 1988. Um, if you note as well, there are two administrative uh, changes that go on within the 76 to 89 era. Um, and yeah, so the event reported the Joint Commission of Mental Health and Illness released during 1963. So this is roughly around the year that JFK would take his fateful trip. But then we also saw a lot of growing dissatisfaction within the economic sector and the social sector as well. Not only was Jim Crow impeding on the connection of individuals, it was causing a massive equity shift where people were starting to ask several different questions all at once. Now, with that too, you started seeing televised events, the televised riots, the televised violences, even so much as I believe there is news coverage of both JFK and Martin Luther King's assassinations. Highly graphic details, and naturally, the administration and the organization answered this with, how do we fix this? So after 63, you have two other uh, years that go on. You see 65 hit, which is the Swampscott Conference, and that is where the individuals start having questions of, well, if clinical psychology diagnoses the individual, what about community psychology? And does community psychology also impact the individual? How does society interact with our mental health and wellness? Now, also, it should be noted there was a hidden agenda. Um, the Joint Commission of Mental Health and Illness released that finding in order to substantiate um, reasoning for deinstitutionalization of non harmful mentally ill individuals. Well, as we move forward, there are societal issues that come into play, and as a sociologist, I do have to recommend that we look at that as well. Now, the 1963 to 1968 era deals with your uh, desegregation of schools, desegregation of community, the Equal Rights Campaign. Up until then, we have been existing as separate and equal. Then you see also the Stonewall riots occur within the gay community. This was within a village of New York, Greenwich Village, and it community psychology grew because people were conflicted. Society was conflicted. You would be conflicted too if you came from cultures that were warring with one another. And it is a interesting psychological observation to take notice of the particular psychological diagnosis of homosexuality at this time. So up until then, we had been functioning on DSM-3, which is DSM-4 now in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And yeah, homosexuality would have been classed as a mental disorder and treated as such with diversion therapy and electroshock. As such as well, civil rights was massively mobilizing for all individuals. But at the same time, the opposition was also massively mobilized, which meant you saw all of the violence. This is the impacting structure right here. This whole entire social movement era is the impacting structure of what is to come and has been to come for Division 27 or the Community Psychology Division. Now, with that, the Community Psychology Division, um, Division 27 was a group of researchers. For the first 6 years, they created, they made, they built, they researched, they found out all of the other things that were needed to go into this community psychology research aspect, but then also apply it to the continued use of community mental health centers, which were also indicative of the Kennedy Plan from the 63 findings. Now, also, this ties into the consolidated community mental health centers and the NCCMHC, which the acronym, it escapes me now. But these guys are basically NIM. Before NIM was NIM. And then you see CMHC, CEP, all of these other conversations going on about how community mental health centers were supposed to work and how they were supposed to play out. Now, that is not the case, unfortunately, any longer, thanks to Reagan, which we'll get to that. But the interesting connotation here is that Kennedy's plans for CMCHs went even further than what anyone could have thought. Now, we take a step back and look at William Neher. William Neher was my special person for this assignment. And with that, he collaborated with Charles Wendell. He is a child psychologist and a community mental health center collaborator. And then he went on to continue to look at the prevention, evaluation, education, and basically organizational internal operations of community mental health centers throughout the 70s, 80s, and 90s. Now, he spoke about a certain deal of like self-help clearinghouses and interaction within the community for these mentally ill individuals and how that would essentially substantiate their abilities to integrate into normal society. Now, what's interesting here is that we elect Jimmy Carter shortly after LBJ. So right around 1976 to 81, which, you know, Jimmy Carter was a farmer, and Rosalind was very adamant about mental health and wellness. And Jimmy Carter basically, through the efforts of Mrs. Carter, was able to empower NIM, creating statewide director of mental health preventions. Uh, Now, what is interesting is that when Reagan is seated, you will see a funding shift occur that goes to a state block grant. Up until Reagan's fiscal policy, CMHCs and NIMS and all of the other acronyms were funded via governmental stipends. When you switch to the block grant puts the funding of those governmental agencies into the state's hands. So you see an organizational reform go on here in the late 70s, early 80s. And the early 80s really tries to defund and depose most of the spending within the psychological mindset. Now, John Morgan was not my person, but I like the name. Morgan is a clinical and child psychologist. John Morgan, subsisting contributions can be found in the community-based prevention programming. So he dealt with prevention programming such as like addictions counseling. He would have dealt with like behavioral reportings, things of that nature. What's really interesting to look at on behalf of John Morgan himself is that yes, child psychology, but as a clinical and child psychologist, he was working with the social norms and the social patterns as well as the developmental stages at crucial times that allowed him to look at this emerging psychological treatments and provide some really good concrete evidences within the discipline. There's a picture of a brain and it's an Anthropopithecus, which is an ape. So the election of Ronald Reagan screwed us all, but that's neither here nor there. What really happened within this mental health department is that the NIM had to work within the state hospital boundaries. They were no longer able to exercise their federal agency authorities, which made that the prevention, the education, and the counseling side exponentially harder due to there being no commonality within the finance side of the operations. Now, you see 14 ounces of prevention, a casebook. It's published. It's published by some of Division 27, but then it's also it creates the substantiated proof necessary to build community psychology for the next 20 years. That is basically where I will leave you all. Thanks for stopping by. I hope you all stop by again real soon. And Have a great one. Bye.